Hello, I'm Ben Guyver, Senior Creative Relations with Dolby Laboratories, and welcome to this month's Music Community Session. I'm very excited to be joined by Nashville-based producer and mixer Jeff Balding to talk about the great mix work that he's doing in Dolby Atmos and some of his tips for creating compelling headphone mixes using the Dolby Atmos toolset. Jeff has worked with some of the icons of music across many genres, including the Eagles, Taylor Swift, the Judds, Blake Shelton, Rascal Flatts, Megadeth, Dan and Shay, and many more. And I'm really excited to get into a conversation with Jeff about how he's equipped his Nashville studio for Dolby Atmos, how he lays out his sessions and adapts his mix technique when it comes to treatment of different instruments and vocals with the Dolby Atmos binaural settings plugin, and how he QCs and monitors for different playback systems. It's a great conversation. Stoked to have Jeff share his wisdom and perspective with us. So please add your questions into the Q&A or question window here, or email them to musicwebinars@dolby.com, and Jeff will answer them live. A few quick items to highlight before we get into our chat with Jeff. We've just released an artist profile video featuring legendary New Jersey-based house music DJ and producer Kerry Chandler, showcasing the release of his new artist album, Spaces and Places. The new album is inspired by and actually recorded at 24 of Kerry's favorite nightclubs around the world. And in this video, he takes us inside the Knockdown Center in Queens as he records a very personal song along with his cousin Aaron on vocals from the club's dance floor. Kerry shows us how the track comes together and talks about how mixing the record in Dolby Atmos, which he actually did himself in his studio, brings the listener into his world and connects you with him on the dance floor and kind of the way he hears the room and wants you to experience the vibe together with him. It's a really special piece with some great footage of the creative process and the party that actually happened the next night from the club where Kerry played the tracks. So it's great stuff. Check it out at music.dolby.com, and be sure to check out Kerry's new album in Dolby Atmos, Spaces and Places, on enabled streaming music services now. Plus, check out Kerry's DJ schedule if you want to catch him on the road. If you happen to be at ADE or at one of the parties coming up, check out his website. He's always out there making people dance and bringing people together. Also at music.dolby.com, you can find our pro site with links to our Dolby Atmos music knowledge base, our user forums and FAQs. There are quick start videos for each of the DAWs there, a dedicated and updated room design section, and links to the studio's onboarding form where you can connect directly with our studio teams around the world as you get your studio going and need any guidance or have any needs around your studio implementation and setup. There you can also get a working trial for the fully working trial for the Dolby Atmos production suite and the Dolby Atmos album assembler. You may remember the album assembler was featured a few sessions ago on a session here hosted by Dolby's Jordan Glasgow and featuring Andrew and Luke of Georgetown Masters, sharing how they use the tool to master full-length albums of ADMs. So really cool session. Check that out if you haven't. You can also check out the other studio profile videos with mixers from around the world, places like Art House and Abbey Road Institute in Miami, Access Audio in Nashville, Sing Mastering in Atlanta, Dean Street in London, Flux in New York City. So if you're a studio or a creative looking to get equipped or have questions, professional.dolby.com is your destination for that. Speaking of Flux, on last month's music community session, we featured a conversation with mixer and producer Fab DuPont, along with mix engineer and producer Nick Hard, talking about the great work they've done on the new Snarky Puppy album, Empire Central. The album was recorded entirely live in Dallas with up to 19 musicians at a time, and mic'd for an immersive experience in mind from the start, which Nick and Fab have executed on very nicely in the finished mix. It's really fascinating to hear how they've done it. And you can actually get a super detailed multi-part deep dive over at puremix.net, which is Fab's site, where they've documented the entire process and are sharing that with the world. There's also video content of the live recording of the album at Snarky Puppy's site. So check that out, and definitely check out Empire Central on the enabled streaming services now in Dolby Atmos. And with that, let's jump over to our chat with Mr. Jeff Balding. Please drop your questions into the questions menu here. Hi, Jeff. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Looks like you're in your studio there in Nashville.
Yeah, this is where I hang out 7 days a week.
Nice, man. Great place to hang out. Why don't you share a little bit of background about yourself and kind of how your studio came together there in Nashville?
Okay, I mean, I've been in Nashville, based in Nashville since 1991, actually. So I've been here for a while. When I started doing Dolby Atmos a few years ago, um, uh, last summer it became quite the hot topic with the Apple doing spatial audio and releasing that. And I sort of saw the writing on the wall. I believe in the format. So it was an obvious thing for me to go, okay, I need to find a place that I can do this and do it to the best that I think it needs to be done. So that's kind of where this place came into play. I opened this last July. So I've been here since. I've got a couple of rooms here in this building. I've got the main room here where I do all the mixing. Then I've got an editing room where all the QC and prep and the assistant works in there, the two assistants. So that's how we roll.
Nice. I can see you've got some Genelecs there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you put your system together and some of the gear choices that you made?
Yeah, when I mean, there's a lot of things, a lot more things than I thought come into play when you start looking at a room when you're putting this many speakers in it. One is size, figuring out that. I mean, I think the first thing you got to do is figure out expectations for the room. What your expectations are and what you want to use it for, the purpose of it. Is it just, somewhere where you can hear what you're doing outside of headphones, or is it somewhere that clients are going to be coming into? And, for me, it was something where I wanted clients to come into. I wanted something that had detail to the speakers and the room, that I wanted to make sure I knew what I was getting when I was mixing, and also something that would work for stereo mixes as well. So I've had quite a tall agenda in it, and I really wanted something that would wow people when they come in, because I have artists, producers, label, A&R, everybody comes in to listen, and I probably have more attended listening sessions than not with this. And funny enough, the artists are probably the most excited to hear it in this room on the speakers. But so I went through a lot of scenarios in my mind. Um, I chose Genelec because, well, one, I like the sound of them. Secondly, they've got the GLM software allows you to manage all the speakers in the room, and I wanted to have that. Um, so that was the main reason, and they're self-powered, which was real important to me to keep it all kind of consistent all the way around. So I've got 8351Bs all around the room. I use a 914 setup, and that's I've got the two wides in there with that setup. That in doing this and being kind of an early pioneer in it, it's like you get a lot of feedback. You call the few people that are doing this, and you rely on a lot of advice. And Genelec gave me a lot of advice. Dolby, you guys gave me a lot of advice, because how you arrange the speakers, everything, how you set it up. I set it up myself, and you know, when you guys come in and tune the room, that 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 was great, and we've shifted things a little, and I'm very happy with how it all sounds. It translates well and works great.
Nice. And so you talked a little bit about, you mentioned that you'll have artists come in and listen. You've mixed a wide range of artists in stereo and in Atmos. I mean, from like Shania Twain to Megadeth, right? Taylor
Yeah.
Swift. What's your general approach, when you're approaching a project, kind of what are you trying to achieve going into it? And what kind of conversations are you having with the producer going into it? And kind of knowing that maybe the artist may be there listening to it at some point. What's kind of your mindset going in?
Yeah, I mean, if it's just the Atmos mix, it's a different conversation than if it's a stereo mix. And same scenario. I mean, I'll mix the stereo mix first, if that's the case, and get that approved, and then I'll work it into the Atmos environment. So that's the case. If it's an Atmos only mix, then the conversations up front with the producer is about stem breakout if they're sending stems, if I'm mixing from a multi-track, or the source basically, and how that works, and what kind of basically the limitations they can create by not breaking out the tracks like I need them. So a lot of that upfront stuff. Then the converse it shifts to creativity, and what they're looking for, what their concept of this is, and whether it's I want to be exactly like the stereo mix as close as we can be, or let's do something different with this and make it different. The limitations are it has to be, if it's a different, if it's not, I think the definition is materially the same. So most people want it materially the same so that it can run under the same, the same file length, the same with Apple when they play it back, that it switches between the stereo and stuff. My concept on mixing though is I think I like the character, keep the tonality basically the same as the stereo mix. The vibe, you don't want the consumer, the listener, to hear something and go, well, gosh, that's not the same song or same production. So my concept is, at least I want to make it immersive. I want it to sound in the headphones. Honestly, I want it to be a better experience than the stereo. I mean, that's the goal, is to give them a little more space, something that has some interest to it. So that's kind of where I come from on the mixing side of it. I'm not like, oh, it's got to be perfect like the stereo. I want it to have the character and everything of the stereo mix, but yet bring something to the table.
Yeah, and when you're working from assets from such amazing, artists and well-produced music, it really gives you the opportunity to really hear the playing and do some interesting things with it. So whether you're working from a multi-track or from the stems, how are you sort of laying out your session? You're primarily using Pro Tools, right? I'm sure you have some templates that you go to. Kind of how do you organize things as you get going?
Yeah, I mean, we set it up in a template that we've developed over. I mean, everything's always evolving. With this, it's ever evolving, because you discover new things, you add things, you find things that maybe don't work consistently, and you're always honing the process. But basically within the session, we bring the audio into it, and there's effects in the session if I need them, um, especially if it's a multi-track. You have to be careful on stem sessions to add ambience to it, because Dolby's already kind of adding some space around it. So you have to be cautious about how you use that, but you can use it effectively. Yeah, so I mean, it's just organizing the files, cleaning them up. Cleanup's a lot of it, because funny enough, a lot of stuff gets by in the stereo mix and gets cleaned up in mastering as far as ticks and pops. And in this environment, I do most all the heavy lifting here. So we check a QC it for cleanup, make sure we got the right stems. There's no parts missing. Preferably it's stemmed out really extensively and well, so I've got some control over the immersive atmosphere, especially with vocals, verbs, delays, separate, stuff like that. So that's kind of where it starts. I thought I ought to touch on the setup and system. Yeah, I'm mixing Pro Tools. I've got a separate computer for the renderer, and everything's Dante between the two.
Nice. So you talked a little bit about vocals. What have you found over the years of mixing in Atmos that tends to work with different types of instruments or different types of elements of a track? Are you utilizing the center channel for vocals, for example? Do you use a lot of height channel? What have you found as you've gone along? And I'm sure it's dependent on the track and what it calls for, but
Yeah.
what have you seen and learned and
Well,
picked up?
yeah, it does. It is production dependent, and what they want. I mean, generally, vocals are up front for me. I mean, especially in the country format. It's all about the song, and making sure that you're not distracted from the song, yet being entertaining at the same time. I shy away from the center channel. I blend it back where it's a smaller percentage in the center channel, and the rest is a phantom image. Um, I've had better luck with translation that way. I think relying on the center channel, especially, I mean, for the folks that do have a home setup with multiple speakers, it's a little safer too, because you never know what they're doing. But I think in general, it's just more consistent to me translating.
Yeah, and have you found any techniques that tend to work well for how you treat LFE and bass management?
That yeah, I mean, I've got a preferred, I guess, workflow that I believe in and I think works well. I do use the LFE. I think it's important because it affects the binaural fold down and gets into that, and it changes how the renderer to me interprets everything else within the blend. So I do use it. I don't rely on it solely for an instrument. I think that's dangerous for me, from my perspective. But for music, I do add that to the low end instruments, bass, kick, whatever else is kind of going on down there that's needed.
Yeah. And so at what point do you start to monitor the binaural mix? Are you sort of starting on headphones and then adjusting to speaker, or probably the other way around? But
Yeah, I like setting it up on speakers. Sometimes I'll start in the headphones because I have an idea of I know what my room sounds like and where I place things. So I can start from that point within the headphones. But I kind of enjoy, I mean, just from a fun perspective, I enjoy working in the room first. I get it kind of roughed in and where I kind of want things generally panned that feel right to me, and serve the song, serve the music. And then I like to go in the headphones and check those positions, check everything within the headphones to see how it's translating in there. Um, and then I'll go back to speakers, see how I'm doing, go back to headphones. I'll check, different headphones, see how it's sounding in that. I have a third computer that I can listen in spatial on. So it really is just, it's all about translation between different things to me, making sure that everybody's going to get what they're getting, what I intend for them to get.
yeah, absolutely. That's great that you've got the ability to monitor all of those different playback environments. So specifically with using the binaural settings plugin within the Atmos toolset, do you use a binaural template and sort of bank objects, or are you kind of just going into it per song and kind of seeing what works?
Yeah, it is per song. There's general starting points and stuff. The setup I use, I tend to use the bed and objects is where my philosophy stands in workflow. Sometimes it varies depending on what the thing is, but again, translation and consistency, that I know it's going to do the same thing no matter what service has it. I think the bed's a pretty reliable place to put things. I like the glue that I get there. I know everybody's got their philosophy and their opinion on objects and beds, but then I'll use objects to do some of the specialty stuff, or to get up in front, top, or rear, back, top, whatever. So that's kind of what I do.
And do you have a special way of dealing with like binaural metadata when you have like multiple things feeding that one specific channel?
Yeah, honestly, other than the bed, because multiple things do go into that. To me, it's about the bed translating into the phones. What that relationship ends up being, and there's so many variables that affect that, and the binaural settings definitely affect that. Um, it's interesting without the binaural settings, how it becomes kind of flat. I'm glad everybody's kind of gravitating to using those now. But yeah, I mean, there's a basic for the bed. If I want something to do something special that's not, and it's in the bed going to a mid setting or a near setting or whatever, and I want to kick it to a far setting, I'll put it in an object. It's just one of those things where you listen in the phones, you go, okay, I really want this to happen in the phones. So that's kind of the approach.
And it may be dependent on whether it's like a singer-songwriter type of song where there's a lot stripped away and you're just dealing with the vocal, or you've got a guitar that's
Right.
isolated, and you're kind of auditioning and seeing how that will translate for the best experience.
Right. Yeah. And you know, the weirdest stuff is I've had a couple of things come through that they sang with this. It was acoustic guitar and the singer singing with some other stuff around it, and because of the leakage, it was a challenge with the how everything got interpreted, especially into the headphones, and finding the right binaural settings that didn't make it wash or do weird stuff was really the ticket to make sure the headphone mix worked as well as the room.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then once you've kind of gotten it to a point where you're happy and starting to QC, you mentioned some of the different QC methods that you have in there. You're able to monitor the spatial mix. You're able to, I'm
Mhm.
guessing, have a consumer playback stream come into your studio so you can hear things that way, perhaps that are
Yeah,
already
I
out
do.
there. How are you kind of checking things on different systems, and kind of what's your process like for that?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, 2 or 3 different headphones and setups. I'll email or text, actually text the file to me, a zipped file, so I can check it on my phone. Um, and through there, I'll listen to an MP4, as well as what I do now is zip the binaural file. I mean, convert to AAC and then zip it and send it. That gives me a higher res, basically MP3 to listen to. And I know that that's one thing I send to clients, because I know that no matter what setting they have on their phone, they're going to hear a binaural playback of it. So a binaural wave is really useful in that, and checking too. But it doesn't go without checking the spatial as well, because that's as close as you can get with what's going to come out.
So when you're holding your listening sessions, what have been the reaction from the artists? What has been their reaction, kind of hearing their music in Atmos in a proper studio environment?
Yeah, their reaction's great. It's a lot of smiles, and they love it. They go, okay, I know what I'm doing next record. They get that sort of thing where it's like, oh man, this is a great playground here. Now that I know what it is, they want to go for it more the next record. So that's encouraging.
Absolutely. And there's such an exciting creative energy in Nashville specifically that's really like unlike anywhere else. How is the community embracing Atmos? How are things going out there in the world amongst your peers and colleagues?
Yeah, I think things. I sense that back in the spring, things really took off. In general, there's a few of us and several that got on board last fall, but this year it really, I mean, everybody sort of went for it. And I think the ones that aren't doing it, it's just something they don't want to deal with learning and getting into, and they're busy enough doing stereo, you know. But yeah, the community in general is excited here, I think.
Awesome. Well, you've done a ton of mix work, and people can see your discography at your site. Well, if folks have questions, they can drop them in here to the questions menu here in GoTo, and we will answer those shortly. Jeff, thank you so much for your time, man. It's great to talk to you.
Absolutely, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jeff.
Hey.
Uh, Please zap the QR code on the screen there to go straight to the pro page where you can download the tools and visit the forum and knowledge base, check out the studio pages. And again, please drop your questions into the questions menu here for Jeff. We have several that have rolled in already and many that have been pre-submitted. So thank you to everyone who has sent in questions already. We will get to as many of those as we can, and to the ones that are currently rolling in as well. So Jeff, awesome conversation, man. We've got so many questions from people that are interested in what you've got going on there. So Sarah has asked if you ever do a stereo mix and a Dolby Atmos mix concurrently.
Yeah, it's a lot of times I like to do the stereo mix first and then the immersive mix, but I have done both at the same time. I have a template that I've set up that I can dial them both in. The thing I find when I do them at the same time, I mean, it's pretty much the same process with the binaural and the speakers, is going back and forth, make sure you're translating and everything is working. It's challenging, but it can be done. The thing that I find I have to do with it, because it prints at a lower level and everything, and I end up mastering it after I mix it to get the things that I like to have on the stereo mix. But yeah, I have done it, and it works. It works.
Yeah, awesome. And so Ninad asks, and I'll kind of combine Casper's question with this too. How are you monitoring different binaural situations, particularly different renderings? You talked about it a little bit in our conversation, but maybe you can explain kind of the QC setup that you've got going on there in your studio and how you're monitoring different experiences again.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, as far as headphones go, I use the Apple Pro Maxes. I've got a pair of Odyssey headphones, the LCD X's, I think, that I like a lot. I also have a pair of Sony headphones I use. So I'll go between different headphones. I've got spatial earpods, kind of got the whole works. I'll check it on the phone sideways, different things. And I check the binaural. I like the binaural wave to check because it's higher res and stuff. But I do check the MP4, and I do have a setup with third computer where I monitor spatial audio, or at least close to it, through Logic.
That's great. So you've got all the different experiences set up there and different workflows as well, which gives you cool ways to like also create in Atmos with these different workstations as well, if you wanted to, and understand the different implementations in Logic, for example, compared to Pro Tools,
Yeah.
which is cool as well. We got a question here which I can answer, and that was, where can I feel the full potential of a Dolby Atmos experience in theaters? And this is a cool question that we get pretty often, but there are actually 300 Dolby cinemas globally that combine a Dolby Vision and an Atmos experience in premium venues, and there are like 7,000 Dolby Atmos screens globally that are cinema partners, such as AMC, for example, and there are private screening rooms, and so yes, you can experience Dolby Atmos music in theaters, and there have been playbacks and events featuring artists such as, you know, like the Beatles, NXS, Freddie Gibbs. So there are a lot of those out there. Thank you for that question. That's when we get a lot. From Kevin, for you, Jeff, being not only a mix engineer but also a tracking engineer, how has your approach towards tracking changed since you've been working with Atmos? Have you thought about placing mics differently? Are you adding more room mics for different instruments?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, especially doing a lot of mixing in the immersive world, you see where the missing elements are when a track's cut mainly for stereo. So yeah, I do add extra mics, do things differently, to knowing that an Atmos mix is coming eventually with that song. So yeah, definitely take that into account.
From a creative workflow perspective, Sarah has asked, since Dolby Atmos is so much, there's so much more space, do you find yourself boosting certain frequencies that you might normally cut in a stereo mix in order to sort of fill the space?
Yeah, you know, no, not really. I mean, it's pretty much the same. The panning and just how you treat things and where you put them really determines a lot of that space. And EQ, I don't find myself doing a whole lot different. I end up, I mean, it sounds different, mix and immersive, especially going to the binaural, but you find those things where your ear normally feels comfortable with them, just as in a stereo mix. So it's pretty much the same.
You talked a little bit about some of the monitoring headphones that you use. I think you said Odyssey and a few others, but when you're testing your mixes on different headphones, are you also checking on consumer earbuds, for example, lower price points, laptop
Yeah.
speakers, other form factors? This is a question from Sarah as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, the iPhone turns sideways. I check that. Don't do a lot of laptop speakers just because of the binaural, but yeah, I've got ear pods and all that stuff. I want to make sure it's translating to what anybody's going to be hearing on it as best as it can, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one from Kevin here. It seems like more engineers in Nashville are putting in Atmos mix rooms. Do you feel that the way Nashville specifically approaches record making, that specifically like with recording musicians live in the same room, capturing a performance, has anything to do with that, the way that engineers are thinking about creating an Atmos?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they definitely take all that into consideration in the tracking process, but I think a lot of guys are getting on board because it's part of deliverables now. It's part of what labels want, and it's becoming just a normal part of the process. So yeah, I think that's a lot of the driving force in that.
Um, you may have mentioned this earlier. I'm not sure if you gave exact dimensions, but what is the size of your Dolby Atmos mix room?
It's not terribly large. It's probably about 15, somewhere in there wide, 15, 16 wide. I think it's around 15, and maybe 18 to 20 long. So, and it's got a pretty high ceiling as well.
And I think you mentioned you certainly have Genelecs for your LCR. What are your overheads?
The 9 I have around is 8351Bs, and then up top I've got 8331s, and then I've got 2 of the large Genelec subs in the room to carry the LFE and any bass management on everything.
Nice. And I think you mentioned you do your tuning through GLM as well.
Yeah, a combination of the speaker management, everything I do through GLM. I do some of the EQ stuff through the DAD software as well. So it's kind of a combination of both.
Nice. So hopefully that answers some of the gear questions, of which there are several that have rolled through from different question askers. So thank you for those. Monty is asking, how do you localize bass elevation in binaural mixes? Is there any tricks or ways that you are able to elevate the bass or make the listener perhaps perceive the bass being in a lower setting in the room?
What do you mean as far as panning and the bottom following it?
Yeah, I think, kind of like specific bass placement, in binaural mixes, localization for, the bass elements.
Yeah, I mean, there's some different places. I don't go crazy with the bass, like panning it up center top or anything. But as far as in the room, there's some different pannings, and they make a difference in how the renderer folds down the binaural. When you pan around, if you're listening in the phones, you can pan around and hear the difference. Maybe the mix opens up, maybe it closes down in different places. But yeah, I mean, I think that's an important part of it. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
If not, they can ask again, but thank you for that. Yeah. This is an interesting one. So Thomas asks, and we're kind of putting you on spot here, but what is the best place or your favorite place to listen to Dolby Atmos mixes other than your
My
studio?
room.
Yeah, other
studio.
than your studio, of course. Do you have one?
I don't know. I mean, the studio environment to me is probably the best place. I enjoy it right now. Other than that, I don't know.
Some people enjoy listening in headphones while they're on the go. Some people have sound bars. There are so many different ways to experience it. But I think, yeah, hearing it in a studio is like undeniable, particularly, like a well-tuned room. It's such a
I mean,
experience.
when it's a great sounding room, it's hard to top that.
Yeah, absolutely. A question here about starting a project at the recording stage. Is your interpretation that artists are perhaps more aware of Atmos and wanting you to kind of like approach a mix, or wanting people to approach recording with Atmos in mind? I think you talked about this like a little bit earlier. Or is it sort of still like an afterthought, kind of post-tracking, post-recording?
I think the artist that's had the experience of hearing a mix in a room where they're surrounded with it, you get all kinds of comments from "this is how it feels when I play live" to whatever. And I think when their eyes open to that, yeah, I think artists, producers, especially producers, are even thinking more of it because they're more aware of the technical aspect of it. If they've not had that experience, I don't know if that's as much of a focus, but the ones that have definitely I mean, you get that reaction where they know what's going on and they're gonna do something extra for it.
Yep. You talked about this a little bit in our conversation, but the question is, do you mix using beds or objects? And I think, the answer was a combination. But if you want to maybe kind of talk a little bit about kind of your theory and setup for
Yeah,
how you do that.
absolutely. So, I mean, I've got templates that are set up both ways with an object bed and then with the bed and objects. Um, my preference right now is a bed with objects that I want to do some specialty placement or treatment to. Um, and everybody will tell you something different. Everybody's got a different opinion on this. Um, I feel like the bed gives me a more consistent translation between headphones and speakers and some different items. That's where I'm at right now, and it's been pretty consistent.
Great, thanks. I'm not sure if you're using sidechain limiters, for example, on all the outputs to the renderer, but Marcus was asking like a little bit more about the object embed output on the master chain. I'm not sure if that applies to your workflow, but
As far as using sidechain on things, yeah, I do use sidechain, and it makes a difference in keeping the glue together on things. I think as plugins, as plugin companies, they're already diving in and putting out product to cater to immersive mixing, and I think the big thing, you don't see too many companies yet that's tying together a bed and objects. There's a couple on processing, but that's the deal. When you can link everything and either have a link and or a side chain, that's pretty important.
Yep. Thanks. We've got a few more questions rolling in, folks. If you still have some for Jeff here, please drop them into the menu here, or you can email them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. Monty is asking Jeff how you treat the use of reverb when working in Dolby Atmos.
Well, that's a wide question. I have some immersive verbs. I'll see if I can answer it. If I don't, hit back again. I use some immersive verbs, and in combination with some stereo verbs that are panned in, strategically throughout the room to get the maximum depth that I want out of things. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Well, here's another very broad question, and perhaps we can whittle it down to specifics, though. In your experience, is what you're doing in the mastering process different in stereo than what you do with an Atmos mix?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the immersive stuff is definitely treated differently than a stereo mix, although a lot of things they do translate across, but there's some things that are different just because of the way the fold down happens and what happens with everything affecting everything else. I think in Atmos is a lot more sensitive to, you change an EQ or you change something and the blend changes, so you have to compensate with the individual parts to make sure you're staying on track with the right blend of the mix.
Great, thanks. Well, this might be a tough one, but what is the most breathtaking effect that you've created or heard in Atmos? This is a question from Thomas.
That's a tough question. I think it depends on the production. I mean, if there's, if the production leads to more theatrics within the mix of stuff panning and moving around, it's fun and it's great. And when you're going to have scene changes between sections, there's some for King and Country, the new album that I did. Some of that comes to mind because the scene changes are really just fun to go between, on some of the songs. And the production, even though I don't know if it was intended, but it really lent itself to immersive mixing. So
nice. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but maybe for anybody that had missed it, can you talk a little bit about your QC process and sort of how you're monitoring different renderings and workflows?
Yeah, I mean, everything's prepped. I'll kind of give you the workflow process. So when stuff comes in, we go through the files, make sure obviously all the parts are there, confirming we have the right take. A lot of times pops and clicks and ticks and everything that sometimes that's missed in the stereo mix and it gets sent to mastering, and mastering will take some of those things out. We go through and declick, depop, whatever, tick everything and make sure that we've got clean audio before we head into the mix stage. And once that's all set up and QC'd and we've cleaned everything out, the other thing is when if it's a stem mix and you're printing stems, if as a mixer, if you have a lot of analog processing that has hiss to it, whether it's a tape plugin or even a compressor or EQ plugin that has an analog button on it that's turned on, that when you print a bunch of stems adds up pretty quick if you have 30 stems in a track. So that we have to deal with and clean out in between things. But once it's all done, then it's set up, it's mixed, checked, and then it goes back to the QC process again once the mix is approved. And in that QC process is the process of looking at leveling, making sure again that everything made it into the final mix that's in the stereo mix if there's an existing stereo mix, and making sure there's no issues with anything, making sure the length of the song is the same as the stereo mix. That's critical in this with Apple especially. And once that's all done, then it's ready to go out.
Great, thank you. Dennis is asking, is Logic your main mixing DAW for Atmos? I think you said it was Pro Tools, but you're doing some monitoring of spatial in
It is, yeah,
Logic.
yeah. I work in Pro Tools. It's what most everything I get is in Pro Tools sessions anyway, and it just works. I've not transitioned over to anything else yet.
Kevin's popped up here with another question. Have you had any artists approach you to first do Atmos first and then mix the stereo mix following that? I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but
yeah, not really. It's usually, especially the stereo mix is usually what needs to be signed off on first, for me anyway, workflow wise.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for all of your knowledge and wisdom. And thank you everyone who's asked these fantastic questions. It's been fascinating learning about you and the way that you work. And thank you for everything that you've done.
Absolutely. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Cheers. Thanks, everybody.